The dumpster sat behind a farmhouse on Widow Creek Road outside Cumberland Gap, Tennessee, on a gray morning in late October, and Hattie Cutler was standing inside it up to her knees in plaster dust, hauling out doors. She was 27 years old, tall, rangy, with dark hair chopped short so it wouldn't catch in machinery she didn't own yet, a smear of grime across one cheekbone, and a flannel shirt with the sleeves cut off at the elbow because she ran hot even in October. She had the kind of face that looked like it was about to say something smart before it said anything at all. Right now what it was doing was studying wood grain like scripture. She pulled a 6-panel door free from under a pile of broken drywall. Heavy, oak, with 100 years of paint and varnish layered on it like sediment, and hand-forged iron hinges still bolted to one edge, and ran her palm down the stile. The demo crew watched her the way you'd watch a woman eating gravel. "That's headed to the county landfill, ma'am," the foreman said. He was missing a tooth and doing her the courtesy of not laughing yet. "All of it. Whole house is coming down by Friday. That's just old junk doors. People throw out a lot of things for the wrong reason," Hattie said, not looking up. "It's warped. It's got lead paint probably. It weighs about as much as a dead deer. What are you going to do with 50 old doors?" Hattie turned it over in her hands. Solid chestnut, real chestnut, the kind that didn't grow big enough to mill anymore because a blight killed off the American chestnut tree back in the 1930s and 40s, and every board of it left in the world was already cut before that happened. She wasn't looking at a door, she wasn't looking at junk, she was looking at a dining table for 8, with the panel line still visible under the finish, like a memory the wood refused to let go of. "I'm going to figure that out," she said, and put it in the bed of her truck. 6 months earlier, Hattie had been working the front desk at a flooring distributor in Morristown, answering phones and reconciling invoices, until the company got bought out, and her position got, in the language of the termination letter, consolidated. She moved back in with her parents outside town, in the house she grew up in the low green hills where every third barn had a rusted tin roof, and every yard sale had at least one broken chair nobody wanted. She was good with her hands, and had no idea yet what to do with that fact. She spent her nights on the couch scrolling through pictures of old houses, the kind with tall windows and paneled doors, feeling a low, persistent ache that she didn't yet have a name for, which was this: she could not stand to watch a beautiful old thing get thrown away when nobody had even looked at it first. Her father, Gil Cutler, had spent 34 years in construction, framing, drywall, some finished carpentry near the end when his knees gave out on ladders, and he did not share the ache. "That's scrap wood, Hattie," he told her, standing in the driveway while she unloaded the truck. "People throw those out for a reason. They're heavy, they're covered in paint, and half of them are probably rotted at the bottom. You can't make a living out of other people's garbage. People throw out a lot of things for the wrong reason, Dad," she said again, because it was the truest thing she had, even if she didn't yet know how to prove it. Gil looked at the stack of doors leaning against the shed like a losing hand of cards, and shook his head and went inside, where Brenda Cutler, Hattie's mother, was already pulling a casserole out of the oven, because feeding people was how Brenda loved them when she was worried about them, and she was worried about Hattie in the specific, quiet way of a mother watching her daughter bet her savings, such as they were, about $1,100, on a truckload of trash. Hattie rented a barn on the edge of the Cutler property, $100 a month from a neighbor who was glad to have someone keeping the roof from caving in, and she filled it, door by door, over the following weeks. She went to 2 more demolitions, drove 40 minutes to a farmhouse being torn down near Rogersville, and started leaving her number with demo crews and contractors around 3 counties, and the doors piled up: chestnut, quarter-sawn oak, Douglas fir, some old-growth heart pine, some free for the taking because the crews were glad not to haul the weight to the landfill themselves, some for $5 or $10 apiece from a homeowner clearing out a barn. In town, word got around fast, the way it does in a place where everybody's second cousin works at the hardware store. Vernon Tuck, who ran the only real cabinet shop in the county, and built kitchen cabinetry and dining sets out of new hardwood he ordered by the pallet, heard about the girl collecting old doors, and made a comment at the feed store that got back to Hattie within 2 days. "Cute idea," he'd said. "Not real furniture. Real furniture's built from lumber you choose, not lumber you scavenge." It stung more than she let on, mostly because some small, tired, unsanded part of her suspected he might be right. She had never built a piece of furniture in her life. The first thing she learned, and it cost her a full Saturday and a door she'd hauled 40 minutes to get, was that not every old door in a demolition pile is a door worth saving. She'd grabbed a stack of 6 from a 1970s edition on one of the farmhouses, flush and paint-free and looking clean, and got them back to the barn only to find, when she went to cut one down, that the inside was a honeycomb of cardboard strips between 2 thin veneer skins. Hollow core doors. Cheap, mass-produced, meant for interior closets, with nothing structural inside them at all. You could put your fist through one if you hit it right. She learned to tell the difference before she wasted gas hauling them. Knock on the face, and a solid door gives back a low, dense thud, while a hollow core door rings hollow and thin, almost tinny. Lift one corner. A solid door has real heft, 40, 50, sometimes 80 pounds depending on the wood. A hollow core door is shockingly light, more like carrying an empty picture frame. And you can always check the edge, top, or bottom, where the paint's usually worn through. Solid wood shows continuous grain all the way across, while a hollow core door shows a thin strip of solid wood framing around the outside and empty space, or a honeycomb cardboard core in the middle. After that first wasted Saturday, she never brought home a door without checking all 3. The second failure came from a door she was sure was good. Solid poplar, heavy, thick, that she'd hauled out of a damp cellar in Sneedville, where it had been leaning for years. She dried it exactly as long as her patience lasted, which was about a week and a half in the corner of the barn, then ripped it down and glued up a tabletop from 3 of its panels, edge to edge, clamped it overnight, feeling triumphant. 2 weeks later, the glue joint let go with a crack she heard from the house, and the whole panel had cupped like a shallow bowl and torn itself apart along the seam. She'd built with wood that was still wet inside, wood that hadn't equalized to the humidity of her own shop, and as it kept losing moisture after she glued it, it kept trying to move, and the glue joint, rigid, unforgiving, couldn't move with it, so it split instead. She learned, from that failure, the actual discipline of the trade. Reclaimed wood has to acclimate for weeks, sometimes over a month, stickered with spacers between boards so air moves around every face, brought down to somewhere around 6 to 8% moisture content, before it's stable enough to glue and join. She bought a $14 moisture meter from the hardware store in town and started checking every board before she touched a clamp, the same way you'd check a fever before you decided somebody was well enough to work. The third failure was the hardest lesson, because it undid a whole piece she was proud of. She built her first dining table exactly like a door, flat, laid on 4 straight legs screwed to the corners, and it held up fine standing empty in the barn for admiring visitors, until she put a real load of dishes and elbows on it, and it sagged visibly in the middle within a season, and racked side to side when anyone leaned on a corner. A door is designed to hang from 3 hinge points and resist a shove from one direction. A table has to carry downward weight across an unsupported span and resist people pulling out chairs at every corner, and a flat panel with legs screwed straight to the bottom has nothing fighting that. She had to teach herself actual furniture joinery from forums and grainy YouTube videos she watched at midnight with a legal pad next to her, coffee gone cold, hinge asleep on the workbench, an apron, a rectangular frame of stretcher boards joined under the tabletop's edge with mortise and tenon joints that turns a floppy panel into a rigid box. Corner bracing, triangular blocks glued and screwed into the inside corners of that apron, which is what actually keeps a table from racking side to side. And, because solid wood expands and contracts across its grain with the seasons, a wide tabletop can grow or shrink a 1/4 inch or more between a humid Tennessee July and a dry January. She couldn't just screw the top down solid to the apron, or it would crack the first winter. She learned to use breadboard ends, a strip of wood capping the width at each end with the grain running crossways to lock the boards straight without stopping them from moving, and slotted, elongated screw holes underneath so the top could shift a little as the seasons changed without tearing itself apart around a rigid fastener. Every one of those words she'd learned from a stranger on a forum and then had to prove to herself, wrong, twice, before it stuck. Then there was the finish work, which was its own education, stripping decades of old varnish and milk paint and shellac with citrus stripper and a heat gun. Patient enough not to scorch the wood, matching new stain to 100-year-old patina by testing on the underside of a panel first, filling a century's worth of old hinge mortises and screw holes with wood putty, or better, with matching wood plugs so they read as part of the story instead of a repair. She got good, slowly, expensively, one ruined finish at a time, at reading a door the way you'd read a person. This one wants to stay rough and honest. This one wants to be sanded down until the grain glows. Nobody handed her any of this. Her father wouldn't help, not yet, and not because he was cruel, but because he genuinely believed she was pouring herself into a hole. Vernon Tuck certainly wasn't going to help a woman he'd already written off around town as a gimmick. What Hattie had was insomnia, a barn heater that barely worked, a second-hand table saw she bought off a Facebook auction for $200, 3 ruined doors, and a laptop propped on a paint can, and she built her whole education out of that. Through all of it, there was Hinge. Hinge was a bronze and white heritage turkey that Hattie had taken in as a chick from a neighbor's oversized clutch, intending to eventually eat her, a plan that had died the exact moment Hinge developed opinions. By the time the barn became a workshop, Hinge had appointed herself its supervisor. She strutted the length of the floor each morning, inspecting every piece leaned against the wall, gobbling with what could only be described as personal offense at the sound of the table saw, and had a documented habit of hopping up to roost on whatever tabletop Hattie had just finished sanding, leaving little grit-flecked footprints in the fresh dust that Hattie then had to wipe down all over again. She photobombed every single customer who came out to look at furniture, sidling into frame with the unbothered confidence of a bird who believed she owned the place, which, functionally, she did. On the worst nights, the ones where Hattie sat on an overturned bucket at 11 p.m., staring at a cracked glue joint and wondering if her father was right about her, Hinge would come waddle over, settle down against her boot without a sound, and just stay there, which was the closest thing to comfort the barn had to offer. The first sale happened almost by accident. A woman named Opal Ledbetter, who ran the produce stand a mile down the road, stopped by looking for scrap wood to build a plant stand, and instead found herself standing in front of Hattie's first finished piece, a console table built from 2 chestnut door panels, breadboard ends, the old hinge mortises left visible, and filled with matching plugs so you could still trace where the door used to swing. Opal offered $200 for it on the spot. Hattie had about 11 hours of labor in it and $40 of hardware and finish, plus a door she'd gotten for $5. And even after she did the numbers in her head, standing right there in the barn, $200 felt like both nothing and everything at once. She said yes before Opal could reconsider. Word moved through the county the way it does, slow, then all at once. A woman named Bet Ramsey, who owned a home and design shop on the courthouse square in town, came out to the barn after hearing about the console table from 3 separate customers in 1 week, looked over 4 finished pieces, the console, a headboard made from a single fir door split down the panel lines, a farmhouse bench, and a small side table, and offered to take 2 on consignment, 40% to the shop, 60% to Hattie. Both sold within 9 days. Bet took 4 more. Those sold too. That was when Hattie started keeping doors indoors overnight to strip and sand, instead of doing it outside, because winter was coming, and that decision was almost the end of everything. A pediatric nurse named Wanda Price came out to the barn on a cold afternoon in January, looking for a headboard for her son's room, and fell for a piece Hattie had made from an old painted door, a soft robin's egg blue, under the stripped and resealed clear coat, the brushstrokes of some long-dead farm wife still faintly visible beneath the finish. Wanda ran her hand over it the same way Hattie always did, and then she asked, casually, the way you'd ask if something had nuts in it, "Is the old paint underneath lead safe?" "He's two. He still puts everything in his mouth." Hattie opened her mouth to answer and realized she had no idea. She drove to the hardware store the next morning and bought a box of lead test swabs, the kind that turn pink or red in the presence of lead, and she tested every painted door in the barn, 23 of them, stacked and leaning, and swab after swab came back red. The house these doors came from, like most farmhouses in the region, had been painted decades before 1978, the year the federal government banned lead in residential paint, and layer after layer of that old paint had been sitting on her doors the entire time she'd been sanding them, dry, unmasked, in an unventilated barn, filling the air and settling into the sawdust and getting swept out into the yard, and worse, riding home on at least 5 finished pieces she had already sold. Pieces sitting, right now, in other people's houses, some of them, like Wanda's future headboard, meant for a child's room. She sat down on the barn floor with the test kit still in her hand and did not move for a long time. Hinge came and stood next to her, uncharacteristically quiet, as if she understood this one wasn't a joke. It was not a fire. It was not a flood. It was worse in its own quiet way, because nobody had done anything wrong except not know, and not knowing had a real cost, one she had personally created out of simple ignorance, one piece at a time, sold with a smile into people's homes. She did the thing anyone would tell you to do, and it was every bit as expensive and unglamorous as it sounds. She called every single customer who had bought a painted piece, 5 in all, told them exactly what she'd found, and offered to take each one back at no cost, either to remake it entirely from unpainted tested wood, or to strip it down safely and reseal it under a professional lead-safe process. All 5 said yes, one of them close to tears, with relief that Hattie had called before anything happened rather than after. She paid out of pocket for a certified lead abatement contractor to come clean the barn floor to ceiling, had the old sawdust and shop rags hauled out as hazardous waste, and spent nearly every dollar the business had made in its first 4 months undoing what she hadn't known she'd done. She got herself tested. She was fine. Nobody, as far as she or anyone could ever determine, was harmed. That fact did not make the months afterward feel any less like penance. She changed the way she worked completely and permanently. Every old door, before it ever came into the barn again, got swabbed on site or the moment it arrived, no exceptions, no matter how badly she wanted the wood. If a door tested positive, she either had it professionally stripped under contained, wet sanding conditions that kept the dust from becoming airborne, or, more and more often, she simply let the stripped bare grain be the whole design instead of finishing over paint at all, which turned out, unexpectedly, to be the look people wanted most. Tested lead safe. Safe for a child's room, she started writing on every tag, every invoice, every listing. It cost her nearly everything she'd built in the first winter of the business. It also became the exact thing that separated her from every other maker of rustic furniture in 3 counties, Vernon Tuck's gleaming new hardwood cabinetry included, because Vernon had never had to think about it, working from clean lumber straight off a truck, and had certainly never had to prove it to a nervous parent standing in a showroom. From there, the growth wasn't a leap. It was a chain, each link only possible because the one before it had held. Bet Ramsey, once she heard the whole story of the lead testing and watched Hattie handle it without flinching or hiding it, doubled her consignment order and started introducing Hattie personally to customers who came in asking for something, with history. One of those customers was an interior designer out of Knoxville named Dara Kessler, who put one of Hattie's farmhouse tables into a client's dining room, photographed it, and started specifying reclaimed door pieces, Cutler Farmhouse, on mood boards for clients from Knoxville to Chattanooga. Orders started arriving from outside the county for the first time. A family in Franklin wanting a table to seat 10. A woman in Bristol wanting a headboard made specifically from a chestnut door if Hattie had one left, because her grandmother had grown up in a chestnut farmhouse, and the tree species didn't exist to build with anymore. The wait list, 18 months after the dumpster on Widow Creek Road, sat at 11 weeks. Hattie was finishing 6 to 8 pieces a month, selling farmhouse tables for $1,100 to $2,000, depending on size and wood, headboards for $400 to $600, consoles and benches in between, and had, by her own count kept in a battered spiral notebook, pulled just over 300 old doors out of landfill-bound dumpsters across 5 counties. The shop cleared a little over $90,000 in its second full year, not a fortune by any measure that matters in a city, but real, steady, hers, and enough to hire her first employee, a young woodworker named Cody Whitman, who'd been laid off from a cabinet factory outside Rogersville, and who turned out to have an uncanny gift for matching stain, and then a second hand a year after that. Gil Cutler did not apologize with words, not at first. He showed up at the barn one Saturday morning that spring without being asked, looked over Hattie's jig for cutting breadboard ends, a plywood template she'd clamped together herself, serviceable but crooked, and without a word started building her a better one out of scrap 2x4s, squared and true, and kept coming back every few weekends after that to build another. It was the closest he'd ever come, in 27 years, to saying he'd been wrong, and Hattie let him have it that way, because some men only apologize with a table saw. Vernon Tuck came by the barn late that same year, ostensibly to drop off a length of hardware he'd overordered, and stood looking at the waitlist board pinned by the door with 11 names on it. "I keep having people come in asking if I do anything with old salvage," he said, not quite meeting her eye. "I keep telling them no." "You could learn," Hattie said, dry as ever. "I'm 61 years old and I do not want to learn how to test for lead paint," Vernon said. "You want the referrals or not?" "Send them my way, Vernon," she said, and let herself smile only after he'd already turned to leave. The quiet payoff came on an ordinary Tuesday, when a woman named Sherry Combs drove 2 hours from Kingsport to pick up a farmhouse table Hattie had built from a chestnut door out of the very same house on Widow Creek Road where this had all started. The last one, the last chestnut door Hattie had left from that pile. Sherry ran her hand over the breadboard end the way everyone did, the way Hattie herself always had, and said her family ate dinner around it now every night, and that her kids didn't know it used to be a door and probably never would, and that it already felt like it had always been there. Gil, standing off to the side with a coffee, watching his daughter load the table onto Sherry's trailer with the same competent hands he used to say were wasted on garbage, said only, "I was wrong." 4 words. Hattie didn't say anything back. She didn't need to. Hinge, unbothered by sentiment, chose that exact moment to hop up onto the trailer bed and inspect the table one last time before it left the property for good, as if she alone understood that her job here was done. People throw away more than they know. A door is easy to see as junk once it's off its hinges and lying in a dumpster. Heavy, painted over, out of style, in the way. But the same door held up 100 years of a family walking through it, and the wood under that paint remembers weather nobody alive today ever felt. Every table in Hattie Cutler's barn started life holding a room together in a house that, in a lot of cases, doesn't exist anymore. Now those doors are the thing rooms get built around, all over the state of Tennessee, one dinner table at a time. If you like this story, hit like and subscribe for more like it, and tell me in the comments about something everyone around you called junk that turned out to be worth everything. Bet Ramsey's shop wasn't the only place in town that started to change its opinion once the lead testing story got around. The women at the beauty shop on Main Street, who had spent the better part of a year referring to Hattie's operation as "that Cutler girl playing with trash out in Gil's old barn," started referring customers her way instead, usually prefacing it with something like, "She's the one who caught that lead thing herself, wouldn't you know?" In a town that size, that kind of correction traveled faster than any advertisement Hattie could have paid for, and she never spent a dime on one. The scale of it, once it started chaining together, was worth setting down in real numbers, because the story only means anything if the numbers are true. In her first year, working alone out of a $100 a month barn, Hattie finished 11 pieces total. By her second year, with Cody Whitman on payroll at $15 an hour, She and Cody together finished 6 to 8 pieces a month, closer to 80 pieces across the year. She kept every receipt for every door in a cigar box that used to hold her father's fishing lures. Most doors ran her somewhere between free and $15, with the odd exceptional one, a set of pocket doors with original cut glass panels out of a Victorian in Rogersville, running her $60 because the homeowner knew exactly what she had and wasn't giving it away. A basic console table took Hattie and Cody around 14 hours combined, from stripped door to finished, sealed piece. A full farmhouse table with breadboard ends and apron joinery ran closer to 28. She sold consoles for $400 to $600, benches for $300, headboards for $450 to $650 depending on wood and size, and farmhouse tables for $1,100 to $2,000. The top of that range reserved for chestnut, which by then she could barely find at all, since the tree had been functionally extinct as a lumber source for the better part of a century, and every board of it left in Tennessee was already sitting in somebody's wall or floor or door frame, waiting to be discovered the way she'd discovered it. The second employee she hired was a woman named Renata Sizemore, a Finnish carpenter's daughter from over in Sneedville who'd been doing furniture refinishing out of her own garage for extra money and answered a flyer Hattie posted at the feed store, the same feed store where Vernon Tuck had once made his cute idea comment. Renata turned out to have a finer hand at stripping old varnish than either Hattie or Cody, patient in a way that came from years of watching her own father work, and within a few months she'd taken over most of the delicate finish work, freeing Hattie up to spend more of her time on design and on the growing pile of inquiries that came in through the website Dara Kessler had all but insisted she build. The waitlist kept growing past 11 weeks, and Hattie made a decision that surprised her father more than almost anything else she'd done. She capped it. She turned down more orders than she filled some months, because she would not build faster than she could build right, would not skip a single week of drying time or a single lead test, just because somebody in Nashville wanted their table by Christmas. A door that's been standing since 1911 can wait 11 more weeks for me to do it properly, she told a reporter from a regional magazine who came out to do a short piece on her. The same reporter whose photographs, Hattie mid-sand with sawdust in her hair, hinge draped shamelessly across a finished tabletop in the background, ruining what would have otherwise been a very serious portrait, ended up doing more for her business than the article itself. Gil kept coming around on weekends, and eventually he stopped pretending the jigs were the whole reason. He'd sit on the same overturned bucket Hattie used to sit on during her worst nights, drink coffee, and watch her work, offering the occasional unsolicited, but usually correct opinion about clamp pressure or grain direction. And Hattie let him have those too, because she understood by then that this was simply how her father loved people, sideways, through tools, through fixed things, through showing up without being asked twice. Brenda kept feeding everyone. By the second year, she'd started bringing casseroles out to the barn itself, on days when Hattie, Cody, and Renata worked through lunch, setting them on the one clean corner of the workbench Hinge hadn't yet claimed, and standing in the doorway for a minute, just watching her daughter run a business out of what used to be, by every account except Hattie's own, a pile of garbage. She never once thought of it as garbage again, and neither in the end did anyone else in town who'd once called it junk.